Thanks everyone for joining us this morning on the first broadband event we're holding in a 4-part series. Just a few housekeeping items we'll go through. I'm Ben Gilman, I'm General Counsel with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Everyone that has joined us has come in on mute. If you have any questions, you can ask them through the chat box, or you also have the function to raise your hand, in which we can then unmute you if you want to ask a question that way. So feel free to ask a question throughout. We'll get through them at the end, towards the end of our presentation this morning. I'd like to thank our sponsors this morning as well. And we first are going to begin with an introduction from Dana Connors, President CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, my name is Dana Connors. It is my pleasure on behalf of the Maine State Chamber to be bringing you today the first in a 4-part series dealing with broadband expansion in Maine. We very aptly refer to it as bringing Maine, spelled M-E, up to speed. And we're pleased that we can do this with our partner, Mission Broadband. I think we've all come to understand as a result of the pandemic just how important broadband is to our lives and to our livelihood. Whether you're thinking in terms of healthcare, education, or the economy, regardless of where you live, regardless of what you do, or whatever your political persuasion may be, there is no question that broadband is not only perhaps the most unifying initiative in the legislature this year, it is one that is on everyone's priority list. We also know that to do it well, we must do it together. That means the public as well as the private working together. That means it's the federal government, the state government, the local government, but also the provider, working together to make maximum opportunity out of this. Today, our series begins with looking at one of our partners, the federal government. What is their role? What financial resources are available to us? Well, we've got a very distinguished panel that have been put together to help us answer some of those questions. And to introduce that panel is our General Counsel, as well as the President of our Educational Foundation, Ben Gilman. Ben, it's my privilege to turn it over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for that message. We appreciate it. And also want to start off by thanking those that helped make this possible, the sponsors for today's event and the series. And we're going to hear a few words from them, but I'd just like to thank them. Mission Broadband is our partner in this presentation, this 4-part series. Our bandwidth sponsor is Lincolnville Fiber Network. Our community sponsor is the University of Southern Maine. And our supporting sponsors are AmeriHealth Caritas, Bangor Savings Bank, Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, Delta Dental, Mimic, and Budman and Winchell. So thank you to our sponsors. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Rogers with Mission Broadband to share a few words before we get started and head into our discussions this morning. Jim?
Thank you, Ben. Good morning. I am Jim Rogers, President of Mission Broadband. I am very pleased to have Mission Broadband join the Maine State Chamber of Commerce in this series of 4 information forums on the critical topic of broadband for our state. Mission Broadband is a company within the ProInfonet family of companies that I began in 1995 as independent technology consultants. For the past 25 years, ProInfonet has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States. Today, we are the managing agent for New England Telehealth Consortium, providing support to nearly every healthcare provider in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. NETC was established to help members maximize available federal funding and is going into its 15th year. Of those 15 years, we have secured over $100 million in federal funding for the NETC members. In 2013, I expanded the assistance to healthcare providers with Health Connect Networks. Health Connect Networks assists healthcare providers in 22 states to maximize available federal funding, to bring much needed connectivity and dependability to over 2,500 locations across the country. 2 years ago, I started Mission Broadband to focus on the needs of towns that lack adequate broadband. Our goal is to assist municipalities, providers, and other government subdivisions expand critically needed broadband for their areas. We do this through coordination of public-private partnerships, locating funding opportunities, and in some cases, assisting the entity in building a network. Every community is a bit different with their needs or their economic outlook, but one thing is clear: we all need to work together to improve broadband. There is a much needed demand, as we all know, highlighted by the impacts of COVID on your business, our economy, education system, and healthcare providers. Our Bangor-based team has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States, with many years of industry experience performing broadband network consulting, feasibility studies, design, build, implementation, and project management. Our multifaceted experience covers municipalities, healthcare, private businesses, ISPs, and broadband networks. You can learn more about us at missionbroadband.com. Thank you again to the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and to all of you for joining this important series. We look forward to today's informative session.
Thank you, Jim, and we really appreciate the partnership through this series with Mission Broadband. We also want to thank our sponsor, Lincolnville Fiber, and I'd like to introduce Alan Hinsey for a minute update on Lincolnville. So, Alan, thank you for your sponsorship in this program as well.
Pull up my slide real quick. Great. Everybody see me? Thanks for having us. I'm glad to be a sponsor for this important webinar series. We just really want to take this quick minute to kind of let people know who we are, LCI Fiber Optics, and run you through, just a little bit about what our company does and what we're doing in the broadband arena. We're a small company. We're a small family-owned and operated company. We've grown to over 50 employees, so we're one of those typical Maine small companies that is owned by Shirley Manning and her family. Our headquarters is in Noblesboro, Maine, but we service all of kind of the Mid-Coast area. We're part of a family of companies that includes Lincolnville Telephone Company, so a lot of people know us as that, but we also have the Tidewater Telecom phone company also for the Damerscott and Pimlico area, but our fiber optic network company is really called LCI Fiber Optics, and I'll show you the footprint for that real quickly. Our footprint in Maine is really from Bangor to Freeport. We're a Maine Mid-Coast community company, and that includes our Lincolnville Telephone Company area, our Tidewater Telecom area, but the larger part of that network is really our LCI Fiber Optic network, which is growing rapidly. We're proud to say that we're part of the fiber backbone for the coastal Maine. We're involved in all of these communities up and down the coast from Bangor to Freeport, providing fiber optic broadband to small businesses, larger businesses, and individual homes all throughout. So we think that's an important piece of our growth pattern. Finally, the last thing I wanted to say is kind of our goal. Our goal is really simple. As a company, we want to have 100% fiber to the home in every community that we touch in that footprint that I just showed you. So to do that, we try to leverage our capital with existing capital that's out there. We've completed 18 Connect Maine grants over the past several years, which has allowed us to grow rapidly in that area. One of those areas recently is the most recent Connect Maine grant that we're working on now is completing the Bremen, Maine Connect Maine grant, which will allow Bremen, Maine to be the first 100% fiber to the home mainland Mid-Coast community. So we're very proud of that, and we hope over the next year to have maybe 3 to 4 other Mid-Coast communities become 100% fiber to the home. And finally, was the Connect the Kids project that we participated in last fall. This was the federal CARES funded project, which allowed us to build out 100 miles of fiber in very remote areas in just 2 months in Lincolnville, Hope, Appleton, and Bristol. And the little young man you see in the picture there, that's a real picture. That was November of last year on a very rural road in Union, Maine. He's watching our fiber crew build out that network. He's going to grow up with unlimited bandwidth, fiber optic bandwidth as a natural part of his life. So that's our goal for all of those communities. Thanks for letting me go on a bit. Our goal really, what we always say at LCI is we're connecting Maine to the future, one town at a time, one street at a time, and really one little boy at a time, apparently. So you can learn more about us at lcifiber.net. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. And we really appreciate the sponsorship from LCI. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for today's panel discussion, which we believe is a really, really good panel. It's going to be a great discussion. To Mike Reed with Mission Broadband. Mike and I have worked on this together. So I'll hand it off to Mike, and you can go through our panel, and we're going to have a really robust conversation today. So thank you. I'll hand it to Mike now.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. The panel that Ben mentioned, I'll introduce it one at a time, but we hear a lot about the federal money coming our way. We heard CARES money last year. I fondly refer to it as the Biden bucks that may be coming our way soon. The panel that we have is going to talk about what that money is and what's going on in Washington, but what's going to happen when it comes to the state, or in some cases has already come to the state. First up, we'll start with Washington. Jordan Crenshaw. Jordan Crenshaw serves as the Executive Director and Policy Counsel at the United States Chamber of Commerce Technology Engagement Center. He directly manages the Chamber's Telecommunications, E-commerce, and Policy Committee. And Jordan's going to tell us how much money we're going to get. Jordan?
I always like being the one to talk about giving away money. So, thank you everybody for the opportunity to join today. It's a really important topic, not only for Maine, but also for the nation at large. Obviously we know that broadband has enabled the digital lights to remain on for many businesses across the country, whether it be through e-commerce, telehealth, or remote work. Some of the things that we've mentioned even about broadband in terms of just the sheer importance of it pre-pandemic. We did a report, you can find it at americaninnovators.com, that talks about the benefits of rural small business had access to digital tools like broadband and cloud computing, and you can't have access really to digital tools without broadband these days. And what we found nationwide was that $47 billion would be added to US GDP just from rural small business alone, and that would also create over 300,000 jobs. For Maine, we found that would actually increase sales in the state by $500 million. It would actually give 3,066 Mainers jobs in addition to what's there now. And then also the annual value would be an additional 115 million. So it's a big deal. Even pre-pandemic, the numbers we would have seen for Maine, let alone the benefits now as we're dealing with an economy that's even more reliant on broadband connectivity. In terms of what we're seeing in Washington on broadband, a few key areas I think are important to note. There's the issue of access to broadband, in which it's considered to be too expensive or the return on investment is not high enough for the private sector to go in and build. And then there are issues of adoption with things like affordability, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic with things like job layoffs. One of the things we'll note is that the private sector-led broadband networks out there today have led the world in connectivity and dealing with capacity changes during COVID-19. And that's because of private sector investment. But we also realize the government has a role to play as well in making sure that all Americans are connected. With regard to what Congress has done recently in terms of the access issue, just 2 months ago when Congress passed the COVID-19 stimulus bill, some key broadband elements for access were passed. First and fundamental to figuring out where broadband needs to be built out is knowing where broadband isn't. And that means that we need to improve upon the maps nationwide that are drawn up to determine who's unserved. We think it's critically important at the U.S. Chamber that funding go to unserved areas to make sure that the funding goes directly to those who need it most. But what we saw in the COVID package was something we pushed for was $65 million that went to the FCC to fund broadband mapping so that we can do the long-term work to figure out where we need to start divvying out those bucks, as you talked about, Mike. But a few other items as well, too. The COVID package also gave $300 million to the Department of Commerce to distribute funding for rural broadband throughout the country. I think we're relatively pleased with some of the parameters that were put in place for that. For example, it's supposed to go to areas that are considered unserved. Also, it's supposed to be tech neutral. So if wireless works better or fiber works better, then the funding is supposed to go to who's best capable of delivering. So those are some good things we saw on the access piece out there, the broadband funding piece for the mapping, and then also for the $300 million for rural broadband connectivity. The other issue is adoption. And this is one that has been incredibly important for homes that are dealing with layoffs or inability to pay. America's broadband providers actually signed up for the Keep Americans Connected pledge last year and kept many connected, even though they were unable to pay their bills because of COVID. But Congress realized that there needs to be even more relief. So what they have done is they have passed a $3.2 billion emergency broadband benefit package. This enables eligible consumers meeting the Lifeline requirements that are out there to get a $50 discount on their broadband service, which would be paid to the eligible carriers. Then if you're in a tribal area, that's going to be $75, and the connected devices, you could actually get another $100 benefit for that as well. Another important piece of legislation that was passed as part of the COVID package was the Connecting Minority Communities Act. This developed a $250 million program to set up an office for minority connectivity at the Department of Commerce, but also establishes a pilot program that works to alleviate affordability issues in anchor communities that are within distance of historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic colleges, and tribal colleges. So Congress, I think, really did try in this last tranche to get funding out there to address the emergency. A few things that are happening at the Federal Communications Commission right now is they are undertaking a request for comment, or actually just wrapped that up, about using E-rate funds to fund the homework gap. E-rate is a program that provides discounts directly for schools and libraries for connectivity, but they're now asking whether or not that should be used for in-home connectivity, especially for students. So that's one of the things that the U.S. Chamber has been involved in. We want to make sure that in doing so, E-rate is funded by universal service funds, that we do not overly deplete those funds in order to ensure that this program could work. One of the other things out there too, when it comes to the homework gap, is Democrats have proposed $7.6 billion in spending for the homework gap itself in a timely, temporary, and targeted manner. We personally at the Chamber would prefer to see Congress appropriate funding that use the universal service funds and not deplete that fund itself. And a few other things at the FCC. They just wrapped up comments on how to distribute the emergency broadband benefit program. Coming down the pike in terms of funding, we've seen several other proposals out there. For example, there's a lot of potential we could see something in an infrastructure package. Representative Pallone has said he expects some movement April and May on this here in DC. And then, we've heard proposals from President Biden on the campaign trail saying he would propose $20 billion to bridge the digital divide. The Congressional Broadband Caucus has mentioned actually $100 billion to bridge the digital divide. So, there are quite a few proposals that are out there. And that's not also to mention some of the other issues that have to happen too, like getting permit streamlining to actually make sure that you can actually cite the equipment that you've just paid to deploy, and some of the regulatory issues about how broadband is fundamentally regulated. But this is an issue area that really is unifying folks on Capitol Hill around the need to do something. It's just the details, once again, sometimes we need to make sure that we get worked out. But otherwise, this is an issue that I think a lot of movement can be done on Washington to alleviate the disparities out there and connect all Americans.
Thank you, Jordan. Ben, I believe we'll have time for some questions if people want to put them in a chat when we get done. There's a million questions I have for Jordan, so I assume we have a few more coming up. Next, thank you very much, Jordan. That was very helpful. You didn't give us the exact amount we're going to get, but we can work on that one. Next up, we're very fortunate to have Heather Johnson, Commissioner of the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. Commissioner Johnson is certainly no stranger to the Chamber. This morning, the topic is going to be how Maine has addressed some of this federal funding, and perhaps how Maine will address, what steps we'll be taking. Commissioner?
Great, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Ben, and the Chamber for hosting this four-part series. I think the more we can talk about the how, is really going to be helpful as we all work together to solve these challenges for Maine people. We're certainly excited to talk about federal funding options and the help that the federal government is likely to offer here as we go forward. So Jordan, thanks for your advocacy at the federal level. We appreciate that. As Dana mentioned, and lots of us kind of know, the discussion has really shifted from, is it needed, should we do it, to how and when. And that's really helpful, right? Because you can take a whole section of the discussion out. I'm pretty sure that there isn't anyone that would say, connectivity isn't important. Connectivity isn't a part of all of our lives as it relates to education or working remotely now. Certainly we're seeing telehealth really expand. And now that we've changed some of these behaviors, as long as we can create the infrastructure to support them, we can provide access to services on a very broad basis for much lower cost as we go forward. Doesn't mean that we won't do a lot of this stuff in person again at some point, but the ability to have flexibility about how we do some of our work can really change that landscape for people. We're seeing real estate prices in Maine increase because people now are able to work from wherever they choose. And obviously, if you can work from wherever you choose, you'd pick Maine and people will come. And if we can have the right connectivity and infrastructure to support them, they'll be able to stay here long term. So, I think that is really important as we move forward. We see three key barriers. I know Jordan talked about two. I think ours kind of fit in as well. One of them is infrastructure, and what is the available infrastructure, and how do you make sure it's manageable, right? Infrastructure is a term we all use as one term, but the reality is there are lots of staggered pieces to it. As an example, I live in a district where they talk about, if they go to remote, how do they stagger classrooms so that families with multiple students in them can still participate, knowing that they can't participate simultaneously. We're seeing that kind of across the state as a real challenge. I know some of you have had that challenge as well. We're seeing, Alan talk about the little boy on the street and the access he'll have. I mean, that is a significant difference from what the access that community has had, and his ability to be able to learn long-term will be significantly changed as a result of that. So infrastructure is one, but I would say as we talk about infrastructure, we should think about what that really means. Are we really enabling people to take full advantage, or are we locking them into something that is a little bit, but not something that allows them to actually move forward? So that's one piece. The second kind of challenge is affordability. Affordability is being tackled right now at the federal level, which we really appreciate. In Maine, we were working on a program that was focused on broadband affordability to try to help connect people who weren't able to be connected because of price. I would say as you build infrastructure, if you keep affordability in mind, there are lots of options there that change the long-term outlook so that you aren't constantly worried about affordability. We need to think about affordability as we build this infrastructure out. That will help us long-term, both from a revenue stream for the private sector as well as access for users. And then the third piece there is digital literacy. How do we make sure that people are able to take full advantage of what we have? How do we make sure businesses can access markets outside of theirs, do all of the things that we know are available to people? We're all learning. We were on a session the other day and somebody realized in Zoom they could move people around and have them ordered the way they want, right? There are lots of opportunities there that are out there, even the little things that will really change the amount of options people have. So having said all of that, what do we do with these federal opportunities, right? As there are federal opportunities, and Maine voters went out and voted, really pretty substantially for a bond for broadband infrastructure as well. I think there are some keys here about how we do this, knowing what's available and what's not available. We've seen challenges at the federal level at mapping, and they are working on some of that. But it's not just about knowing what we have and where it is. It's about knowing what's next. How would you build the infrastructure? What are the right tools to estimate projects? How do we build accountability into this work so that we know, are people really being connected? Are the projects at the right price? Are there long-term take rate challenges that we need to address and be prepared for. So having a knowledge platform that will help us move through that is very important to both efficient utilization of these federal funds when they come, and accountability in the model to make sure that where we are spending taxpayer money is generating the return that we intend. We've seen, right, with a number of programs over the last year that providers that are working in Maine and based in Maine can react really quickly and do really good work on behalf of their constituents. So, we look forward to these federal funds and an efficient knowledge tool that helps us all work together more effectively. So I think we need to keep these three pieces in mind. And when we build infrastructure, think affordability along the way. What are the long-term ramifications to how we build infrastructure and how we create access for people? So like you, Mike, we look forward to this federal funding and knowing how much, but as we work kind of with our federal delegation who is actively working on this in DC as well, we want to put the tools in place so that we can be efficient and accountable when those funds come.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next up, Tim Brooks is a USDA General Field Representative for New England. He's got Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont, but I've actually found him sneaking off into New York on occasion to see what's going on over there. He's only been in our area for a short time, but I think he's covered more geography than we have. So with that, Tim Brooks.
Thank you very much. I don't know if my PowerPoint slide's going to be up or not. If not, I'm just going to go off the one I have uploaded. So essentially, bringing money, seeing money from the federal government. Appreciate the offer to be here today. Essentially, we have 6 programs I'm going to talk about a little bit. Most importantly, I'm going to talk about our Reconnect program. And the Reconnect program is around, we're on our second round, and we just completed that. We actually had some leftover money, about $750 million. In 2020, round 2, we had 172 applications for about 1.57 billion of requests. So far we funded about 65 of those. We have a second chance.
Tim, could I just interrupt for a second? We don't have your slides up, and I'm not sure. Do you want to go ahead and share?
If I can, I would do that.
You should be able to share your slides now. And by the way, 750 million is a lot of leftover money. I just want to say that while I have the floor. But let's see if you can't. I know Angie can run the slides if need be.
Well, oh,
there you go. You got them now, Tim. Thank you.
And Tim, I did also just drop Tim's entire deck in the chat for folks as well.
Okay.
So I'm not going to do a slide presentation because I'm jumping around, but I wanted everybody to have the opportunity to have a lot of different stuff for Maine. So taking a look at that, just some key components to kind of be prepared for. It is hearsay at this point in time, but Congress at one point was looking at funding another $1 billion for our Reconnect program. It is in the middle of a rewrite. And so we're looking at target date of a fall and winter timeframe. Of course, that's subject to change. Right now, we're in a second chance period, 37 applications. In perspective to Maine, just real quickly, the Reconnect program, we funded about 10 million for projects in Maine under the first round. The second round, we had a couple applicants that were unsuccessful, but they're now, 3 of them been moved into the second chance. It appears one of those is moving forward based on the RDOF situation. It kind of changed things. So keep that in mind. I'm going to switch to a different slide here. Bear with me. Hopefully you can see this one. The rural broadband program is something to keep an eye on. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it is in the rewrite. So that's going to be a program that they're talking about loan grant combinations, as well as a possible loan guarantee. So I just want people to kind of keep your ears out for the new, what they're going to consider probably the rural, it's going to be considered a rural broadband program. And that could be half a billion dollars. You know, we just don't know. Right now, we just finished up Community Connect is a very important piece. It's a smaller grant program, $3 million with a 15% match. We just got done with this round closing December 23rd. We received 73 applications for about $150 million. Typically, there's anywhere from $30 to $60 million in that pocket of money, and that is an annual program. And then I wanted to share one last slide. And that's just something to kind of consider. Nobody thinks about this, but in the last, one of the last rewrites 3 years ago, the distance learning telemedicine course is important for all of Maine and the chamber, not just for broadband, but also for the distance learning once we get everybody connected like LCI and Mission Broadband are doing. Appreciate their efforts. But the distance learning has a caveat for 20% broadband facilities that are owned and operated. It's based on the total project eligibility. So keep that in mind as on top of the actual ability to get equipment. It is for equipment, but it is a big program. We had about 1,000 applications in 2 rounds last year. You can see that out of 534 applications, we had 252 million. We funded 85 approximately. Those will be announced soon. In the first round, they funded approximately 116 out of 276 applications. The CARES Act was responsible for giving us 25 million in that program. We also got 100 million in the CARES Act for the Reconnect program in round 2. That funded an additional 11 to 12 projects. So obviously Reconnect is the program that we're waiting for to really kind of deliver the goods at this point in time. Hopefully we'll get about $1 billion. You know, right now, the last thing I wanted to just kind of put in your minds, I didn't put it in my report, but we do have about 40 programs with USDA. And one of those programs, besides housing and community facilities and everything, we have lots of money, lots of pockets that fit especially well in the chamber world. But one thing that is active currently is the business and industry. It's similar to the SBA, and they can do some loan guarantees with the BNI program. That's kind of self-determined projects with that are eligible in non not to duplicate areas, but it is a lender-driven program, which is also very nice for your chambers and your projects to potentially get a long-term rate with a good long-term loan for broadband if it's applicable area. And with that, I will give it back to Mike.
Thank you, Tim. That's a lot of numbers in a short amount of time. So there's a good example of what we are trying to focus on. This panel is federal money that is already here, has already come to Maine, is available. And I want to point out something the commissioner said. You'll notice that this panel, or this series, is not going to focus on, we need broadband for this, we need broadband for that. We all know that. The focus of this series is going to be, how do we work together to fix it? And Tim's presentation here is some of the programs that are out there. You can get lost on those websites looking for data. So I urge everyone to take a look at that. Thank you, Tim. Next up, and last but certainly not least, Sarah Davis, Senior Director of Government Affairs at Consolidated Communications. Sarah is going to talk about the FCC's recent Auction 904 RDOF. We've heard a lot about that, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And Maine picked up about, I think, 70 million or so out of that, Sarah. Sarah's actually going to focus on, okay, what does that mean for Maine? She's going to show how that federal money is targeted for our state. Sarah?
All right. Let's see if I can get this started. All right. So as Mike indicated, I'm here to talk about the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. You will never hear me call it Auction 904. I get the numbers confused and never remember which auction, but RDOF as we fondly know it, and specifically phase one of RDOF, as you'll see through the presentation, there's more to come with respect to RDOF, but I'm speaking to what we already know, what has happened and what has been awarded specifically to Maine. I'm going to give you an overview of the RDOF. I'm going to give you the RDOF results and then leave you with what's next. I don't promise to have the answers there, but I will indicate a few things that are sort of sitting out there and who knows what'll happen next, right? As Mike said, I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs at Consolidated Communications. Just a quick look, we have about 3,400 employees. We have a 23-state footprint. We've been around about 125 years, and we are local. Our largest market is here in Maine. Our largest RDOF award is here in Maine, and we are extremely focused and committed to this, this market because it is our largest. So with respect to the RDOF, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, it's a federal program administered by the FCC with the goal, the self-claimed goal of closing the digital divide by construction of rural broadband networks. It was a $20.4 billion program. And as I indicated earlier, it has two phases. Phase one with up to $16 billion made available. And then phase two, an additional $4.4 billion. Important piece here for everyone, we hear a lot about this, is phase one is specifically targeted to completely unserved census blocks. Phase two will be targeted to partially served census blocks. So you hear a lot about mapping, and I was excluded because one person in my census block was served, even though I wasn't. The goal, at least, of the FCC is to sort of close that gap in phase two. So the mechanics of the RDOF, how they did it through a reverse auction. I'll talk a little bit in a minute more about what that means. The phase one addressed high cost census blocks. This is often lost, that are unserved, meaning no locations in the census block have access at least 25.3. The auction opened October 22nd, 2020, and awards were announced on December 20th, 2020. And this sometimes gets confusing, but the first full construction year, so with respect to milestones and targets, is 2022, although providers do have the ability to get money a little earlier than that. So when we talk about milestones and targets, really that year one is the first full year, which is 2022, which is next year. Okay, so what is a reverse auction? You'll see here I've put down how the FCC describes a reverse auction. I won't read that to you, but essentially the FCC identified the areas that they believed were both high cost, yet not extremely high cost, and did not have service at 25.3 in a census block, meaning no person in that census block could have had service at 25.3. And they established through modeling the price that they thought was needed to deliver the service. And they set out on an auction slightly above that total amount. And that's because of some weighting and some latency tiers that isn't particularly important and I won't bore you with, but set out to auction off these census blocks at that price. The auction was supposed to close when they met their budget, because they started above budget. When they met their budget, the auction was supposed to close. And the only exception to that was to the extent that there were people bidding in the highest tier and continuing to be more than one provider bidding for a census block in the highest tier. And so they ended up below budget as a result. And so through their modeling, the FCC chose to identify as eligible locations census blocks with locations that could be served in between $40 and $212.50 per month. So they modeled out the whole country. They said, what does it take to serve this location per month? And if it fell in this range, they decided to fund it. They didn't fund more than that because they would have blown their budget instantly. They didn't fund less than that, with the theory being, if it's really that low cost to serve, the private sector will take care of that. And you can see I've put here for reference in the CAF2 process, that was $52.50 and $146.10. So as we move forward, they've lowered both the lower end based on the fact that if they still weren't built out, maybe the assumption that the private sector would build there wasn't a good one. And the higher end, because they had more money to reach into higher cost areas. And then there's some differences in tribal areas and census blocks without 10-1 service, as there should be. There's a significant amount of compliance required with this. Consolidated is currently engaged in CAF2 compliance, and so we know all too well that this stuff can be extreme. It's a lot. So when Heather talks about accountability that the state of Maine's working on, the federal government was really concerned with that as well. So we have to submit geocoded locations. We have to make certifications when we've met the milestones, and we have to do some 481 reporting, which basically about our ability to offer voice service and the ability and the fact that we use the funds in the way they were intended. Here are the milestones. RDOF award funding has to reach 40% of the locations by the third year of the program. And as I told you, that starts in 2022. So the end of the third year is 2024, with 100% build out through 2027. And this sometimes gets a little confusing, so I put it in here as a note. It's 10 years of support, even though the build out is only over a 6-year period. The FCC thought 10 years of support was more stable, would attract more bidders. And so they chose a longer support period, but obviously a shorter build period because it's important to get this stuff out there. So here's what everybody cares about, right? How much, when, and where. So in Maine, there were 4 winners, 4 awardees for the RDOF auction. All 4 awardees filed their long form application, which was due a few weeks ago, meaning that they, assuming nothing comes up in that process, are well on track to receive the funding. The total funding in Maine was just over, Mike said this, but just over $71 million, and it funds 27,755 locations. And this is how it breaks down. Consolidated Communications received $31 million in 10-year support. It's just over 1,500 census blocks and just over 11,000 locations. Pioneer Wireless, 243 census blocks, 1,600 locations, and about 5.5 million. Both Consolidated and Pioneer Wireless bid in the 1 gig low latency tier. What that means for Consolidated is that we will be delivering fiber to the prem, XGS, GPON solutions. For Pioneer Wireless, I don't speak to the specifics of their technology, but based on their 1 gig low latency bid, it's fair to say it is certainly a fiber to the prem solution. People often ask, they want to be certain, they sometimes feel like they don't understand it correctly, and they always want to know, are we getting fiber to the prem? And the other 2 awards in Maine are Red Zone Wireless, 39 census blocks, 755 locations for about 507,000. And then Starlink Services, this is the Elon Musk SpaceX low Earth orbiting satellite technology, serves just over 1,900 census blocks, 13,849 locations, and they were the biggest winner with $34 million in 10-year funding. So that's a total 10-year. I often say, you know, this technology is newer and yet to be fully tested, but it is a low Earth orbiting satellite. It is not the satellite you're used to. So I think sometimes people have a view of satellite. This is not what they're used to, maybe in a HughesNet type solution. And here it is. So this is what it looks like in the state. I put a link over here. Feel free to link to this map. You can scroll in and out. You can search your location. This is all available on the web. The green is the gigabit low latency. That's the Consolidated Pioneer. The red is your SpaceX, your satellite technology, and then the blue down here is your Red Zone Wireless. So what's next? So there's additional funds left. Of the first phase, 6.8 billion was not spent. The FCC, I think, will more than declare this a success. They surmised that doing a reverse auction would serve these areas for lower than they anticipated in their budget. And to date, they are correct. And what they have said publicly is that that will be rolled into phase 2. Additionally, in phase 2, you have the 4.4 billion that was set aside. That will start looking at partially served census blocks. And then Jordan covered it pretty well, so I won't bore you with the numbers again on the stimulus money. I think the most important part of this as it relates to RDOF is the mapping, right? I mean, we hear frustration all the time about people feeling like they were being left out. I say a couple of things to that. The first issue is that there's a misunderstanding that the only reason you're left out is because somebody said you were served. As I indicated earlier, there are high and low costs that can exclude areas as well. So that's not always the case. But the largest reason probably is that a location is served in a census block. And so as we move forward with some more granular and discrete mapping, I think that we'll do a much better job really identifying those locations, identifying the support necessary for those locations, and creating the next round of the program. As Jordan indicated, hand in hand with this are low income programs. We know what rural areas of Maine look like. I applaud the federal government and the FCC for trying to work on this, emergency program, the 3.2 billion, to try to really offset the cost of broadband for people who have to learn at home and other things. And then certainly, as Jordan indicated, and he did a good job with all the numbers, there's other support in terms of federal dollars for infrastructure, for tribal programs, for all those things to supplement this. In closing, one of the things I hear a lot is the time frame, right? Because everyone wants broadband and everyone wanted broadband yesterday. I heard that through CAF2, and I'll remind you that program ended at the end of last year. And I remember people saying it's just not fast enough. And now it's over, right? And we're on to the next thing. So, I encourage us to take a step in the right direction, to not, sacrifice the good for the perfect and start moving forward. Because had we not participated in CAF2 and got our fiber deeper into our network, it would have made bidding on RDOF significantly harder for us. And I assume there's similar stories from the other providers, through either Connect Maine grants or other things. So, it's all incremental. Every day that we're building fiber, we're pushing it closer to the consumer. And every time we push it closer to the consumer, we are creating an easier situation to get to the next consumer. So that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. That helped bring it home to what it looks like in Maine, and that map was really helpful, Sarah. So thank you again to Jordan, Heather, Tim, and Sarah. Ben, do we have a couple minutes for questions, or?
We do. We have at least 10 minutes for questions, Mike, and we do have one in the chat.
Sure.
And if you can see, we'll start there and you see if others have questions, either raise your hand or put them in the chat room. And I'm sure Mike has a couple as well.
Oh, the first question, I think I'm reading that, huh? You know I don't like chat. When entities get CARES funding like LCI received to bring fiber to the mid-coast, is that fiber now publicly owned since it was federal dollars? And if so, can other providers access that CARES fiber network? Alan, are you still with us? Or maybe, I'm not sure who might know the answer to that question.
This is
Alan,
Sarah. Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead, Heather.
no, go ahead. Alan just unmuted. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here. The CARES funding that we received was all used in our ILEC area, in our incumbent local exchange carrier areas, so in our phone company areas in Hope, Appleton, Lincolnville, and Bristol. So we really were using that fund to build onto our existing network and to extend throughout our network that was already in place. So that really was funding that was used to build out our own network. So we own it when it's over. It's all said and done. That was part of the deal. And Heather maybe can speak to some of that too. I mean, in terms of the guidelines for how people applied and what was required for that. There was pricing issues. They had to have established a certain bandwidth requirements, and you had to be able to identify exactly where these student households were and what it was going to take to get to them. And that was part of the criteria, I think, for making some of those decisions. But in the long run, yeah, we own it. It's part of our network, and it allowed us to reach out. The nice part about this, and I think Heather might speak to that too, is it allowed us to get in front of 325 or 350 unserved student households and teacher households, which we know through the COVID experience, it was just a mess. It's a mess. They needed that bandwidth, obviously. DSL was not going to cut it, okay? We understand that. This helped us get there. But in the process of doing that too, it also, frankly, those are also major unserved regular areas too for non-student households and businesses. And it's going to put us in front of many, many more, hundreds more unserved areas that will allow us to actually bring that service to them as well. So I don't know if that was a long answer, but yeah, the answer is we own it.
Yeah, and I think that's the answer for this piece, but I think the question is a really good one in that there are lots of different business models in the broadband universe. States are using a variety of choices. Georgia just made a really interesting announcement last week about, public-private partnership that they are going to work on in rural Georgia. So I think, well, that is the answer for that specific project. Alan answered the answer for that specific project. I do think there are models that we need to continue to think about and look at, and that can weave in this affordability piece potentially on the front end, which we did a little bit of that with the CRF funds. So I think there's a lot there for us to kind of collectively explore. I would say the private sector is the key part of the work, right? They play a pivotal role in how this happens. But as states and communities get more and more involved, there may be other options that allow for some blended business models that help all of us move forward. So I wouldn't leave that as the only answer. I think there are lots of answers to that question, and we need to continue to evaluate.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. That is certainly what Heather just said. As far as our company is concerned, that is part of our formula. Whenever we go into a community, and as I said, our goal is to be 100% fiber to the home in every community we touch. Each one is different, and we look with each one differently and how that's going to work. How do we work together? How do we come up with a blended model that might work in terms of community ownership, our ownership, making that thing work? The idea is to figure out the way to get the funding that we all need to make it, to really get it out there. So yeah, we're open to all of that.
In addition to any other questions that may come in, I haven't seen any of the panelists have any last minute, 1 minute wrap ups they'd like to do. I'll start off with Jordan so I can surprise him. Did you have anything further to add, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I think even dovetailing off that last question too, is that I think that there are various models that we've seen with public-private partnerships. We've seen good examples throughout the country. Virginia has a very good example of government working to get funding with private companies. It's the VATI program. But at the same time, I think it's important that the private sector is the primary driver of the infrastructure and the investment, even if that's working with government to obtain funding. Just because it's been beneficial in making sure that we actually maintain our technological leadership and our capacity with bandwidth during the pandemic. But I'll make a shameless plug here. I'll put in the chat. It's our tech agenda in terms of connecting all Americans from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the chat. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Heather?
I want to reiterate one of the things Sarah said, because I think she made a really good point, which is we just need to keep moving forward. Fiber density is the key to long-term success, right? We can spend a lot of time analyzing, is it this or is it this or is it this? But Sarah, I think, made the point really well, which is fiber density. And the closer we can get fiber to all Maine locations and businesses, the better off we'll be long-term. And so we just need to keep moving while all of this other work plays out. We need to keep doing the day-to-day steps to make sure that we are making progress. So thanks, Sarah. I think that was a good point.
Mr. Brooks.
Yeah, to piggyback off Jordan, the private partnership is vital. We do have the availability of funds for municipalities, but just a reminder that engineering and consulting is vitally important when working with the federal government. That's a 15 to 20% cost to the project, and the staffing requirements for reporting, following the regulations is very important. So that leverage is important, and it's pretty much open to everyone. But make sure you read through the FOAs, the regulations, the user guides, because just the user guide for the Reconnect program is pretty lengthy document. It's not hard to read, but you need to be well versed when you get associated with the federal government funding, because there are a lot of requirements.
Sarah.
Yeah, so two things. I'll address that question a little bit, and I think it's easy to say, the government paid for the infrastructure. Well, there's a lot more than the infrastructure. As was just pointed out, there's engineering, and there's builds, and there's a cost model at the end. And so, to the extent you want public infrastructure with your public dollars, to the extent the private sector engages, they will seek significantly more money if that's the answer, right? The way they model out their costs, or the way we do, and I assume everybody else does, is, the cost of the infrastructure plus the revenue that comes in on the back end. So public infrastructure doesn't produce revenue and can't guarantee any take rates. And so, you're always sacrificing something. It just seems really easy to say one solution or the other. And something that we see in the traditional telecommunications is that when we disrupt that market, and there isn't high take rates, the infrastructure suffers. And so open access infrastructure in a Portland per se, in theory could work. Not now, because there's already 4 or 5 networks there, but in a greenfield model. But it's not going to work in the middle of nowhere. There just isn't that many subscribers, and you'll quickly find that no one will serve it because there just isn't any money on the back end. So I just caution everybody against simple statements like this will solve it or this will give lots of choices, because there's something you sacrifice on the back end, right? For state granted monopolies. With respect to the RDOF program, please feel free to reach out at any time if anyone has any questions. It's exciting to see this build coming to Maine and seeing this all built out. I encourage you to look at the map and look at how rural some of these areas are and how things will change significantly. And I note that, you may see a census block that's filled in, but the fiber has to get there. And so there'll be a lot of areas that'll be passed along the way. So the benefits of this will be exponential to the actual areas identified.
Thank you, Sarah. And I just want to say once again, thank you very much to the panelists. I think this is clear. The target of the Maine State Chamber and Mission Broadband is we're in this together. We all know what the problem is. Let's figure out how to fix it. And this is the first step in this 4-part series to say, how do we get together? How do we do this? Sarah's description of RDOF is a great start. Look at those maps before you go off in your community and decide you're going to do something. Gather all the information. I used to joke with Tim about he just ran around New England with a big bag of money. I think Tim runs around New England with a great big bag of regulations and a bag of money. So he's not kidding when he says, be well versed in these things before we set out. But this was the goal to get this series started and know that we're all in this together. And Maine's a big state, but it didn't look that big when Sarah showed it on the map. I think we've got this. So Ben, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And once again, thanks to our panelists. That was such a great discussion and great information that was brought to us. So thank you all. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Sarah, on behalf of the Chamber. We really appreciate it. I want to, as Mike said, this is the first of a 4-part series. Information is going to be coming out, but our next one's going to be March 9th. You're not going to want to miss that one. We're going to be hearing from our congressional delegation and specifically some of their staffers that work on the broadband issue to give us a little inside baseball of what's going on in DC before in the last two we get down into the state level issues. But once again, thanks to our sponsors, Mission Broadband, LCI, University of Southern Maine, Amera Health Caritas, Bangor Savings Bank, Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, IDEX Laboratories, Delta Dental, Mimic, and Rudman and Winchell. So thanks everyone for joining us. We're just a little over an hour today. And I think there was one last note in the chat room from Jerry Quayle with Spectrum CEO, with Spectrum Healthcare. The future will be better. I think we heard that today. So thank you all. And we look forward to the further discussions in the next 3.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.